Hello and welcome to another spooktacular edition of the Two-Story Boarding House. I'm Krusty McSkellingtons, and I'm going to read you a book called Loose Tooth by Stephen Kroll. Fangs and Flapper were twins. Everything they did together. When Fangs soared through the night sky, Flapper soared after him. When Flapper read, Fangs read too. And when the other bats played flying football, Fangs and Flapper always joined them. One day in the middle of reading class, Fangs discovered he had a loose tooth. He felt the tooth with his tongue. It was very wiggly. After class, Fangs showed Flapper, then he showed his friends. "Wow," said Lizzie the lizard. "That tooth's going to fall out any minute." "You'll get lots of money from the tooth fairy when it does," said Henry Hawk. Flapper felt around with his own mouth. He wanted to have a loose tooth like Fangs, but he didn't have one. At recess, all the other animals crowded around Fangs and his loose tooth. Fangs was delighted. Every time someone came up to look, he did a loop-the-loop around the schoolyard. The whole time Flapper hung from the jungle gym. No one paid any attention to him at all. That night at dinner, the tooth was looser. "Be careful how you bite, dear," said Mom. "You don't want to swallow it, Fangs," said Dad. "I got 100 on my spelling test," said Flapper, but nobody paid attention. They were too busy looking at Fangs. Fangs bit down onto a piece of bread. Suddenly his tooth popped out of his mouth and landed in his soup. Fangs was frantic. "Where is it?" he shouted. "I can't see it." "It's got to be in there somewhere," said Mom. They all flapped around the bowl. Dad stuck in a claw and pulled out the tooth. "Hooray!" shouted Fangs. "Hooray!" shouted Dad. "The tooth fairy comes tonight," said Mom. "I bet she's ugly," said Flapper, but nobody even heard him. After several family swoops around the neighborhood, it was time for bed. "Remember, the tooth fairy only comes when you're asleep," said Dad. "I'm going to sleep right now," said Fangs. He put the tooth on the ledge beside him. He went to sleep smiling. Nearby, Flapper hung frowning in the dark. "Fangs has been getting all the attention," he thought, "and I'm sick of it. I'm going to steal the stupid tooth." Quietly, he flew over to Fangs. Carefully, he slipped the tooth off the ledge. Then he glided gently to the ground. Now, where could he hide the tooth? He didn't even have pockets. He flew to the kitchen. Mom was already there. She was mixing the batter for some muffins. Flapper was so surprised to see her, he dropped the tooth. Plop! It fell into the batter. Flapper didn't know what to do. He hid it on the ceiling. Mom was so busy working, she hadn't noticed a thing. She finished mixing the batter and popped the muffins into the oven. "Oh no," thought Flapper, "the tooth's in a muffin." Mom waited until the muffins were done, and then she flew back to her corner of the cave. When Flapper was sure she wouldn't hear him, he glided back to his spot, but he couldn't sleep. Much later, he heard the flapping of wings near Fangs, followed by some grumbling. It must be the tooth fairy, he thought, as he finally dozed off. In the morning, Flapper was stretching his wings when he heard Fangs screech, "The tooth fairy took my tooth and didn't leave me any money." Flapper shrugged. At breakfast, everyone was so confused. "I'm sure the tooth fairy came," said Mom. "She probably couldn't find the tooth." "But I felt I left it for her," said Fangs. "Maybe it fell on the ground," said Dad. "It didn't," said Fangs. "I looked." Flapper was much too worried to say anything. He tried 2 muffins, no tooth. Any minute, somebody would... "Ouch," said Mom. She pulled a piece of muffin out of her mouth. In it was the missing tooth. "My tooth," said Fangs. "Goodness," said Mom. "How did it get in the muffins?" asked Dad. Flapper wiggled his wings nervously. Everyone looked at him. He knew he had to tell the truth. When Flapper had told the whole story, Dad, said Fangs, "I'm giving you the quarter the Tooth Fairy would have left, but Flapper, I'm giving you a quarter too. We shouldn't have ignored you. Flapper looked at Fangs. Fangs looked at Flapper. You know what? Said Flapper. What? Said Fangs. My tooth feels loose. It does? Said Fangs. How terrific. Let's go show our friends. And the two of them flew off together. It's the end. So what do you think of that story, boys and girls? Was it spooky? There's lots of spooky things here. Now my friend Krusty the Cat is going to read you a story.
Today I'll be reading The Beast Who Could Not Say Boo. It was a warm October morning, and Boris, a beast of the forest, woke up early. He was very excited because today was his first day of boo lessons to prepare for Boo Day. Boo Day takes place each year on the same day that humans celebrate Halloween. On this day, beasts hide in pumpkin patches and jump out and shout boo. When a human comes along to pick a pumpkin, Boris had a simple surprise for his classmates. Today he would learn that he was no ordinary beast. He was Boris, the scariest beast alive. Boris hopped out of bed, wrinkled his nose, scrunched his eyes, and made a horrible face. Then he whirled around and faced the stuffed elephant sitting on his dresser. Boo! He shouted. The elephant stared back at Boris, its eyes wide with terror. Next, Boris approached the family cat. Booing and stomping his feet, the cat immediately stopped licking her paws and ran into the closet to hide. The scariest beast alive was very proud. Suddenly, Boris' doors opened, and in walked his mother. I'm the scariest beast alive, Boris shouted. Goodness, said his mother. I must have been in the wrong room. I was hoping to give my son a special hug before he went to his boo lessons. Then she turned to leave the room. The scariest beast alive unscrunched his eyes and unwrinkled his nose. Mama, he cried, it's me, Boris. His mother turned and smiled. She opened her arms and Boris ran over and snuggled up against her. Even beasts like hugs. At school, the classroom was filled with more beastly faces than Boris had ever seen. Suddenly, the scariest beast alive thought maybe he'd like to go back home. As he started to head out the door, a large hairy hand clamped down on his shoulder. It was Mr. Rompus, the boo teacher. Take a seat, beast, said Mr. Rompus. Class is about to begin. Boris watched as Mr. Rompus slowly circled the room. He then pointed to the beast sitting right next to Boris. Okay, beast, said Mr. Rompus, stand up and boo. Boo, he shouted in a terrible voice. Mr. Rompus smiled. Absolutely beastie, he exclaimed. Now you, he commanded. Stand up and boo. This was the moment Boris was waiting for. He took a deep breath and started to shout. But something went wrong. Instead of a big boo, all that came out was a little puff of air. And it sounded like, huh. Mr. Rompus frowned. Maybe you should try it again, he said. Boris closed his eyes and tried to pretend he was alone in his room. But all he could squeak out was a tiny, Everyone in the class started laughing. That will never do on Boo Day, said Mr. Rompus. All week long, it was the same thing. Boris could coo and hoo and even woo. But whenever other people were around, the scariest beast alive was too nervous to say boo. Boris spent the night before Boo Day alone in his room. He didn't even bother to practice his scary faces. Come on, Boris. It's time to head to the pumpkin patch. Boris' mother called. You don't want to miss Boo Day. Boris reluctantly walked out of his room and grabbed onto his mother's hand. As soon as they entered the pumpkin patch, Boris ran out and hid behind the biggest pumpkin he could find. Since he knew he couldn't scare anyone, he didn't want to be seen at all. Soon a family of humans came in. They walked through the rows of pumpkins, not even noticing there was a beast hiding behind each one. Boris held his breath and tried not to make a sound. All of a sudden, his pumpkin started to shake. The humans were picking his pumpkin. Before Boris could run and hide somewhere else, a man and a woman and a little girl were staring right at him. Boris could feel the other beast looking at him. He knew he was supposed to scare the humans, but instead, he just kept his breath, hoping everyone would go away. "Can I keep it?" asked the little girl, as she bent down to get a better look at Boris. Boris couldn't hold his breath any longer. His cheeks were now completely filled with air. As the little girl reached her hands out towards Boris, he blew out all of the air in his cheeks. And with the air came the loudest boo anyone had ever heard. The girl screamed and all three humans quickly ran away. When the humans were far away, the beasts came out from their hiding places and cheered for Boris. The beast who couldn't say boo really was the scariest beast alive. Mr. Rumpus even presented Boris with a special ribbon for being Boo Day's hero. And the first thing Boris, the hero, did was run to get a hug from his very proud mother. The end.
Alright, boys and girls, ghosts and ghouls, be sure to have a very nice Halloween, and good night.